we have three amazing panelists with us today. We have Melina Haritopoulou-Sinanidou, recipient of our Greek Herald Woman to Watch Award last year with her sister Zoe, who's also in the crowd. She's a rising biomedical researcher undertaking a PhD in neuroimmunology and neurotrauma. She will tell us a bit more about that soon. Round of applause, yes, thank you so much. Then we have Margaret Skagias with us, founder and CEO of Caring Kids, a social worker and public health professional supporting young carers across Australia through the Joy Box program. And then we have the beautiful Honourable Justice Chrissa Loukas-Karlsson. Did I say it correctly?
Yeah.
Perfect. Former resident justice of the Supreme Court of the ACT, a trailblazing jurist with a distinguished career across defence, prosecution and international law. So let's get into it. We'll start with Melina. Welcome, thank you for joining us today. Let me get these. All right, so Melina, you grew up in Greece before migrating to Australia. How has your Hellenic upbringing shaped your values around education, resilience, and ambition as a woman in science?
Well, yeah, I would say that
It should be.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah, so I would say that growing up in Greece has really shaped me as a person. Well, because I grew up there during a period of economic instability, political instability, and well, generally, us young people at the time, we knew that there wasn't really much of a future for us in the country, but we still all really worked hard, which is something that I think defines Greek people. We still just really work hard, even when it doesn't seem like there's much for us in the future. And also something else was that our education system is quite rigorous. Like, I think here you can pick your subjects in school, whereas in Greece you have to do everything. In high school I did about 20 subjects, I think. So obviously I knew that I wanted to do science, but I also had to learn history, ancient Greek, and a bunch of other things, which I think really gave me just a well-rounded perspective about everything, and I think it's really shaped the way that I think, and I think it's given me an advantage, because coming in Australia, I feel like I have an advantage of the way that I can critically think about things, or think outside the box sometimes, just knowing things about other disciplines has helped me in that way. So.
Yeah. Can everyone hear Melina? Just at the back as well?
No.
Yeah, okay.
You need to speak, right?
Yeah.
Like that. So just going back a bit to that, as a migrant woman entering Australia's research sector, what challenges did you encounter? And I guess, how did you manage the often invisible pressures that come with building a career in STEM?
Well, I think coming to Australia was generally a bit of a cultural shock. I think people here generally behave quite differently than they do in Greece. I think in Greece I was just very used to this kind of communication. And people are very forward, very honest. They will tell you exactly what they think, and I was very used to that. I love that. And then I came to Australia, where people are just very polite and they will just say yes to everything, and it gets very confusing because they don't always mean yes. So I think navigating that has been interesting. And I think as a young woman, there's also kind of this perception, I feel that in Australia they kind of expect you to be this kind of very optimistic, very smiley person, just, I don't know, they have all these expectations around being a woman, which I guess they also kind of had in Greece, but not so much. So, yeah, I think I'm really not like that, and I think because I was used to that more forward style of communication, people would often perceive me as difficult or rude, or they would just be taken aback. So, because I think my first impression as a person as well is people think that I'm quite shy, and then they like, oh wow, okay, like she's that, how dare you? So I think at first, I got into some awkward situations where I thought, okay, maybe I need to tone it down, and I started, really saying yes to everything, and it really led to, yeah, I tried, it led to some difficult situations. Eventually I realized, like, no, I can't do that. I can't keep going like this. So I decided to just maintain what I call my Greek personality. I'm just like, okay, people just have to deal with that. And I think some people don't like it, some people do like it, and then I just think, I'm just gonna work with the people that can handle this, because I think that's just the communication style I prefer. I think it's a good collaboration if you come communicate like that.
Amazing. I love how when you said Greek personality, you looked directly at your mum and she's smiling over there.
Yeah, I deal with this Greek personality all the time.
Yeah. All right, and Margaret, let's move to you for a bit. You've spent nearly 3 decades working across child protection, health, and community development. What personal experiences or values first drew you to this work?
I think my journey into social work began in high school, where I was able to put my hand up to a lot of opportunities that were afforded to me, a lot of leadership positions. I did attend school in an area that was surrounded by a lot of disadvantage, and I became acutely aware that some of the experiences of my students were that they weren't perhaps being able to participate in certain things that maybe other students living in other areas were able to participate. And I was also able to see a lot of poverty and a lot of low expectation at school about what we could achieve, and perhaps also what we could achieve as women. And this lit some sort of fire in me for change. So I was one of those annoying people at school who put my hand up to whatever I could find. I would find grants for outdoor classrooms, I would join the SRC, I'd organise fashion parades. I was very annoying. But deep down, what I was trying to do was affect change. I was trying to bring better. I knew that there could be different. And I was given the opportunity. They did hand me the microphone. And I realised that you can use your voice to lead and give a good example to other women, whether they were other girls at school to show what you could do, or whether you took that into a future career where you could impact on people's lives and make a positive difference. And so I chose to take the direction of my life and to move into a career in social work, where I thought that was the right place for me to address disadvantage and to fight for equality. And so those were some of my early experiences that led me to make the choice that I did. And over the last 30 years, I've had the good fortune to work in a variety of different places, but the core values of all social workers are social justice and equality, whether that be with women or in other spheres, and certainly we've done a lot of work, but I agree we have a lot more to do. And as women and as everybody here today, our participation in events like this does make change, and it makes change for the future and the girls of tomorrow.
That ties in really nicely with Justice Chrissa here. All right. And a bit about your upbringing. You're the daughter of Greek migrant parents and grew up between Queensland and Sydney. How did that upbringing shape your understanding of justice, fairness, and opportunity?
Yes. Well, first of all, I have to acknowledge that my mother, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, is here with us today. Because human beings have always learned by telling stories, I'm going to tell you a story from Queensland. My parents ran a Greek cafe in Queensland, and but before I tell you that story, and I think it's very important that I do, I just want to tell you my first job in the law was the Aboriginal Legal Service, okay? And before I proceed any further, I do want to acknowledge and pay my respects to the Aboriginal people of Australia. And we are indeed a most fortunate country that we have 3 great levels to this society. Number 1, the original First Nations inhabitant who had their special connection to the land and continuing. Secondly, that our legal institutions and our parliamentary institutions come from the settlement by the British, and as I've worked in the law, I think we've been most fortunate to have that system. And thirdly, the great waves of multicultural migration that we've had to this country, and of which the Greeks are a very significant proportion. And I think as a country we punch above our weight because we combine those three things: respect for the original inhabitants, respect for our system of law and parliamentary democracy, and fortunately we have compulsory voting, so our sensible middle holds, and we're not subject to extremes as some certain other countries are. And thirdly, the acknowledgement and respect that we must pay to every wave of migration that has come to this country and enriched this country. Now, back to my Rockhampton story. So, my parents ran a little cafe in Queensland, right? The that little series that Hellenic and her husband Leonard had produced, the Great Cafes of Australia. So my parents in central Queensland, in Rockhampton, ran a cafe. And then I remember walking home from school one day to my parents' cafe. I was about 6, and there was a sign in another cafe on the way to my parents' cafe that read, "Don't go to that other cafe. Come to this cafe, because if you come to this cafe, you can be guaranteed that your money will stay in Australia." Oh. Now, at the age of 6, I thought, that seems rather unfair to me and somewhat unjust, so I think it was kind of inevitable that I would become a judge in Australia. And secondly, let me just tell you that people kept going to my parents' cafe and not to that other cafe for 2 reasons, right? Number 1, my parents made better food. And number 2, they always smiled and were kind to their fellow human beings, which I think is the chief virtue amongst us all as human beings. And may I just say how proud I am to be here with such a brilliant young scientist over here. And also, these joy boxes, let me tell you, what you do in terms of, recognising that young children who have to look after parents or look after siblings, and that is such a beautiful and special thing that you do, to recognise that, because we have all seen in our own communities how young children, and I was one of them, had to translate documents for my parents and what have you, But I mean, when parents get ill, you're there showing them that you matter, and here's some joy for you too. So you go, sister. And I'm going to tell you another story. When I started law school, I was all of 17, and I came from doing my HSC in the western suburbs of Sydney, right? And I remember turning up to the University of Sydney, and there were a lot of people around me talking about mummy's and daddy's yacht. And I thought, I did not know that having a yacht was a prerequisite for doing law. But there you go. But I have other stories to share with you later, but that's not for me.
We'll go back to Margaret for a second, because you mentioned, like you said, that we're talking about these joy boxes. Let's get Margaret. Tell us a little bit about caring kids and the joy boxes.
Thank you. So in Australia, there are 300,000 children who are caring for a family member living with an illness or a disability, and these children go unnoticed. Most of them go on to become their adult carers. So in Australia, there's 1.3 million unpaid carers of people with a disability. They do the hard yards. Many of you are carers or were young carers, so you know what I'm talking about. But there's no days off. Christmas Day is just like any other day. And for young children who are trying to make their way in the world, It can affect their friendships, it can affect their education, it can affect their future career progression, and I felt like this was something that I wanted to make a difference. So I started Caring Kids Charity, and we decided, or somebody just gave me a bag of stationery, someone else gave me sports equipment, someone else gave me some books, and then we realised that these children were missing out on a childhood. So our joy boxes are there to give them the tools of childhood so they can play and have fun. Many of them don't get to participate in sport like my children have the privilege of doing, because I can drive them there, I can pick them up. And but when you're a young carer and there's a seriously disabled person in your home, mum and dad are very busy. And just being able to take someone to footy practice for an hour and wait there and come home, it's just not going to happen. So we include the sports equipment in the boxes. Now when the boxes arrive, we ship them across Australia. So we've supported 3,000 children to date. And children get it addressed to them in their name, something for them. Now for many of them, it's the first time they've ever received a gift that's for them. All gifts are typically for the child or someone else in the family who's not well. And it's a very joyful moment, but parents tell us that it's time for them to celebrate that child. So this is a child that does all the care, all the love, all the support, all the communication, all the taking to school, bringing home, making sure their brother or sister is okay, but they have a chance to celebrate that child. One of the things that young carers told me when I was a young carer support worker for Carers New South Wales was that they felt completely forgotten and they felt that no one noticed them, and that's what hurt them the most. They didn't mind. Actually, many of them couldn't think of anything they'd rather do than look after their brother or sister or their mum, but they just felt like they were glass children and no one noticed. And I thought, you know what, we can do something. We can do something about that. And I know you can't help everyone, but even if you can help one person or 5 people, then we should aim to do that. And that's the Caring Kids story.
Melina, we'll get you to tell us about your current research into neuroimmunology and spinal cord injury. What is it? Why is it so important?
Okay, I'll try to say this as simply as I can. So, I guess with a spinal cord injury, that's it's very important to study it because, well, not just to stress people out, but anyone can get a spinal cord injury. Really, like it can happen from an accident or a car crash or anything. And the reason that I really wanted to study this is because, well, my grandpa, when he first came to Australia as a migrant, he worked at a factory and he was lifting some heavy boxes, and well, he lifted the wrong way and then that injured his spine. And well, he was lucky because it happened at a level where he didn't get complete paralysis, but it really did affect him for his whole life, and he had to stop working, and it was really difficult. But then, yeah, basically, if you get it at specific levels of your spine, the higher up it is, the more paralysis you'll get, and it causes different levels of disability. You can even get your organs not being able to operate properly as well. So it's this very complicated illness. And then for me, I studied neuroimmunology. And basically what that means is with spinal cord injury, you get the original impact to your spinal cord. But then on top of that, you get a secondary response. So your body, the immune system is your body's defense cells, and they get activated and they go to the area where the trauma was, and they basically try to clear out any dead cells because that's what they would normally do. But then they kind of get trapped in there, and then that creates scarring and it stops the tissue from regenerating. So there's basically no cure for that, and we are still at the phase where we're trying to understand, you know, what these cells are doing. Some responses are good, some responses are bad. So, yeah, we're trying to figure out how we can target these and modulate them to get better outcomes for patients. Yeah, so that's basically what I do. Yeah, so in my PhD project, that's what I'm trying to understand, basically how you can modulate these cells and how you can use that to improve outcomes, push them in that direction.
You've worked at leading institutes like Peter Doherty Institute, Murdoch Children's Research Institute. Was there a moment or mentor that affirmed that you belonged in this field?
Yes, there definitely was. I think the moment was actually my first ever internship. So that happened when I was in my second year of university. I was an undergrad. And I was actually, uni was not really what I expected. I found myself getting a bit bored. I just had to learn all these things from a book. And then we were doing these labs where they were teaching us extremely basic things that I just was not finding it really intellectually stimulating enough. And I was just starting to just questioning, is this really what I want to be doing? And then my mom actually encouraged me. She said, okay, during the summer holiday, maybe you should try to find a job in the field. So I sent out hundreds of applications to just everyone. I wasn't really going to apply, just anyone that takes me, I just want to work, do some sort of project. And I was very lucky because Dr. Sebastian Duchenne, the scientist at the Peter Doherty, he agreed to have me work on a project, and actually he was the only one that didn't want me to be an assistant. He said, you can come and work here and we'll give you an actual project and we'll even pay you, which was very surprising that he would do that for an undergrad. And he was obviously an amazing mentor. I was only there for 2 months and I learned so much, and that project was also a coding-based project, which is something I was a bit scared of because even in school I was very bad at maths. And I had a teacher and he was telling me, never become a scientist. My maths teacher was always saying, never become a scientist, you don't have what it takes. So, this is the like, I'm like, okay, fine, I'll give it a go. And I actually found that it gave me so much confidence because in 2 months I was able to actually work on this code, and the code actually worked, and then they used it for a publication later on for COVID. And the great thing is that Sebastian actually acknowledged me as well on the publication to put me on as an author. So that was the moment where it just made me feel very confident, and after that it was actually really easy to find more opportunities. So yeah, I'm very, very grateful to you.
Let's go to Justice Chrissa again. You entered the legal profession in the late 1980s when it was still overwhelmingly male. Your career has since taken you from public defender and crown prosecutor to the UN International Criminal Tribunal and the ACT Supreme Court bench. What challenges did you face early on, and looking back, what are you most proud of in the impact of your work?
Well, if you've got an hour. But I just want to tell you a story about when I first became a barrister, right? And that'll give you an idea of what it was like when I first started. Okay, so it's the early 90s, and I've been asked to go to this special barristers' dinner. So I'm there at the about 100 people there, and there's little place cards everywhere, and I'm seated next to this male Anglo-Saxon judge, right? And he takes one look at my name, right, spelt in the traditional Greek way. This is before I had the Karlsson and I married the Swedish guy. I had Chrissa, C-H-R-I-S-S-A, and then Loukas, L-O-U-K-A-S, right? And he takes one look at my name card, and he says, Chrissa Loukas, what is that? And seriously, in that tone of voice, right? And I said, well, that's Greek. That's Hellenic. My parents migrated here from Greece. And then he said, oh, you're one of those. And I said, yes, I'm one of those. You know, the people that introduce the world to democracy and philosophy. Whereupon, this man turned his chair around and never spoke to me again, right? Now, anyway, that man's dead. And I'm a Supreme Court judge, so there you go. But one thing that I determined, and that's why mentoring is very important to me, that I never want somebody else to come into the legal profession and be countering that sort of, may I say, BS?
Yeah.
And I just think it's really important that we realise that the law is for the people. It's not for the privileged people to prance around and think they're superior. So that's one thing. And the other thing I want to say is that I had a really great honour bestowed upon me last year where I was asked to be the patron of kindness in the law, which I think is a very important, I think the chief characteristic in any fellow human being is kindness. And as I've said on many occasions, because I believe in equality before the law, I do not care how much money you have. And I do not care if you're a very important person in the hierarchy of our society. I care if you have kindness in your heart. And that's all that matters. And I was very proud, I have to say, if I'm allowed to do this, that a book was published a couple of years ago and with 50 human rights cases that changed Australia. And one of the cases that they chose was one of my judgments, which was about the rights of prisoners in jail to have fresh air. So yeah, that's enough from me. And may I also mention, there's another dear friend of mine who's in the law, sitting in the audience there with her 2 children, who, Lauren Casamatis from Connecting Lawyer Mums, who wants to make sure that women in the law, who are also parents, have the opportunity to connect with each other and understand each other's struggles. And one thing I know is, if you're alive and you're human, you've got to struggle. The only people who don't struggle are in the cemetery.
Let's stay with you. In your retirement remarks, you recently retired. Last year? End of last year?
Yes, December. Yeah.
You spoke candidly about the realities of burnout in the legal profession. How do you think the justice system can better support the well-being of those who carry such immense responsibility, like yourself?
Look, I think that we just have to pay a lot of respect to the importance not just of physical health, but of mental health, right? And it just seems to me that let's not pretend. You know, none of us are perfect. And as I just said before, we all have our struggles. In fact, when I was having my farewell speech as a judge, because I thought no job is worth dying for, thank you very much, right? And one of the things I said was, I'm going to write a book, and I'm going to call it How to Push Your Way Through Burnout, subtitled, Of Course You Can't, You Moron. In that way, madness lies and possibly cancer. So my view is this: the hardest thing in life to achieve is balance, and that's why our great ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle, you know, we're talking about panelists and ariston, right? Which is, in excellence lies in balance, and it is the hardest thing for each of us to achieve as individuals and within society. And that, to me, is the greatest pinnacle of human success if we can achieve balance in our lives, which is, I know, next to freaking impossible.
On to Margaret now. Growing caring kids from a local initiative into a national program required both vision and persistence. What were the biggest challenges along the way, and what kept you going?
I think for anyone here who has started their own business, you will know how difficult it is to start something out of nothing, to create all the systems and the processes, to make all the relationships, and to never give up. There are so many doors that did close in the start of my journey, but the determination that I had, I guess it was the inspiration, was the stories and the children, kept me going. And it takes a long time for people to understand your cause, especially when it's hidden, which is why it's so important to keep fighting. I know that there's 60,000 charities in Australia, so it is a very crowded place, and every charity is very important. I know in the beginning some people said, oh, don't start your own, join what someone else is doing, but I feel like for a lot of people who start charities, it isn't just about the cause, it's also a transformative journey for them. And for many people who do get involved in caring kids, we've got lots of volunteers working across a lot of different roles. It brings a certain something to their life, a certain happiness, a certain spark, a certain reason for being, and so there is that side of it as well. But generally being open to making new connections, being positive, being confident, and growing networks and relationships is what has helped Caring Kids go from supporting sort of kids in the local area to reaching kids that live in regional areas, remote areas, could be Northern Queensland, could be Western Australia, and it's just the perseverance to keep going and also try new things.
Yeah. Let's say that for women working in the community and not-for-profit sector, particularly those whose leadership often happens quietly, what advice would you offer about backing their ideas and stepping into visible leadership?
I think even in my own example with my Greek heritage, I've been able to see women in a lot of different roles. Obviously there's women here who do work in the not-for-profit sector or who volunteer for other charities. There's many women here who take on roles in the community, whether it's supporting your own, the area in Greece that you're from, or whether you're working or volunteering through your local church. And I found some people do their work very quietly, very humbly, and it's the nature of the giving person that isn't really wanting to be at the front and receive all the accolades. It's quite an uncomfortable position for many people, because the reason why we do this work is to help other people and not for people to look at us. But then I realised at a certain point that if I wasn't willing to do that, that my cause was going to go unnoticed and that less children were going to be helped. And what it was that I was going to be able to do to make a difference and capture, people's attention and move them maybe with the stories of some of the children that we help. So I think it starts with small steps. It's definitely lots of things of getting out of your comfort zone and sharing your story in a small way, but remembering that by doing that, you're encouraging more people to come out and help. And so over the time, I've been very fortunate, and there have been some articles that have been written, including by the Greek Herald, thank you so much, that have sort of raised the profile of Caring Kids, and we've found different people that are willing to speak up about what we're doing. But I think it comes with a little bit of practice and a little bit of taking a step into the unknown and just hoping for the best, and little bit by bit, we've managed to get there.
Melina, what advice would you give young Hellenic women, especially migrants or daughters of migrants, who are considering careers in science?
Yeah, well, as I said before, being in science is a very rewarding career because you get to actually create real change in people's lives. I guess the advice I would give is you need to be confident and authentic to yourself. I think people are going to have all these expectations about how you should be and how you should behave, but ultimately, you just need to focus on just going in and doing your experiments. Like, it is actually a very hands-on job. You don't necessarily need to give in to all these ideas. Just go and do your experiments. The other thing I would say is, I think something I've done, and if I was to go back and do differently, is I get, I guess, very drawn in by these very impressive sounding projects. I'm like, oh, that sounds really cool, I'm gonna go work on that. But I think what's very important, especially early on in your career, is to actually find those good mentors, because if the project sounds amazing, you as a student are always going to have to just do what your supervisor tells you at the end of the day, and if your supervisor is not supportive, that's going to be really, really difficult. So there are actually really good mentors out there. I've worked with them, but also there's people that will treat you like free labor, so that's something to definitely look out for. And then my other advice is, well, I've been to a few conferences now, and something I've found is there's actually so many Greek scientists in the field from all around the world, and you can get to meet these people in international conferences. And even last year I went to a conference in Brisbane and I got to meet Professor John Lambris, he's a huge scientist, huge name in immunology. And I just, he actually saw my name on the leaflet. He's like, oh, you're Greek. And he actually came and found me. And that was completely shocking because my supervisor, he wouldn't even go talk to him because he was, not considered, so big and impressive. So that's just a huge advantage, I think. I think, finding those Greek people in science, and they all just have this sense of camaraderie. They really want to help you out at the end of the conference. I met his family, I met everyone, we took photos together. If you need any advice after your PhD, you should message me. So, and I find that all Greek people tend to be like this, so that's actually something to look out for.
I love that a lot of your mentors are male. That's really nice as well. Men supporting women is a good thing as well. We'll go to Justice Chrissa now.
Oh, wow. Oh, you're right.
Yeah. You've been open about your recent cancer diagnosis and the perspective it has brought to this stage of your life. How has that experience shaped the way you now think about work, purpose, and the pace at which we live our professional lives?
Okay, so a lovely young female surgeon rang me in Canberra to tell me that I had cancer, and as that, so all I was thinking was, oh, I've got such a busy day in court, I've got to do this one and there, blah, blah, blah. And so I take this phone call and it's like, yeah, it is cancer. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then I think I had this sort of out-of-body experience because I thought to myself, well, and then she kept telling me about what we'd be doing next, good scientific stuff about, radiotherapy and immunology and chemotherapy and what have you. But in my head I'm thinking, well, okay, well, I have to be objective here. That's very important, firstly. And this is the sort of running commentary I had in my head. I thought, well, I know that many people in this situation might think, why me? But what I'm thinking is, why not me? There's so much going on in the world. Look at Gaza, look at Israel, look at Ukraine, look at Russia. This is honestly what's going through my head at the time. There is so much going on in this world. Now my mother's crying. Don't cry, Mum. It's okay. Okay. I just think it's very important to just take stock of your life and remember what's important. And for me, I wouldn't have changed anything I did in my life, number one. Number two, I have, I'm proud of the career I've had. I'm proud of my amazing mother on International Women's Day. And I'm proud that my husband is such a great feminist. And I hope that my 17-year-old son also becomes a believer in equality. Though I have to say, when he was 13, and I did inquire of him gently, have you done your homework? And I thought it was gentle. He said to me, look, sure you're a judge, Mum, but who judges you? I think the young kids call that a sick burn, right? And I was like, look, I said to him, it's not just you judging me, there's also the Court of Appeal, there's the High Court, there's the media, there's the community, and by this time he's grown completely bored with what I'm saying, he's back into Fortnite, okay? So, look, honestly, what the perspective it has given me is this, right? I think that, and it leads on from what I was saying before, we just need more balance in our lives. Now, human beings are not robots. We are not robots. And for me, yes, I know we've got the sort of, the onset of AI and what have you, but for me, the people that succeed on this planet, it's not just about IQ, it's also about EQ, it's about phenotype, right? That's what matters. And it wouldn't hurt for us all to have 4-day weeks and not be so stressed all the time. And honestly, when live, you know, this time in certain quarters it's been rather unpopular to use words like diversity and equality and inclusion. But what's the alternative? The alternative is exclusion, uniformity, and a mean world that I don't think any of us want to live in. So yeah.
That's all my questions.